So anyway, let me just start because we have an audience, so this is the seventh meeting of a group of APSA members dedicated to trying to bring analytic knowledge into the socio-political arena in ways that are more useful than what we seem to be able to do right now. And I have a particular model that I'm testing out by doing this, and that is that Luba and I trained together at the institute that is now known as PANI, used to be NYU, but it was a one-person model at the time. The analyst was the container of the truth, and all the vectors were pointing in one direction. That transitioned over time to a two-person relational model, but it was still designed to treat symptoms and pathology. And what I'm thinking that we need to do is develop some kind of a theory and methodology that addresses the socio-political arena, the outside world. And I have to admit, I was thrilled when Luba emailed me, and became engaged because for me, as I'm thinking about a theory and a methodology, she sort of represents the outside world, that third dimension, the person who actively listened to us, had responses to what we were saying and what we were leaving out, and sort of invited herself into the arena in a way that was exciting. And so I should give a disclaimer here. When Freud was developing his theory, everything he heard validated his theory. You could say, hi there, and he'd say, that's an Oedipus complex. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say, oh, Luba, you're the third dimension of blah, blah, blah. Please stop me. I'm aware that I'm doing that. And I don't want to, just hold you hostage to my cockeyed theories. But anyway, I think I'd like to invite Luba to share her reactions to the videos that she's been the last one that you watched and responded to, and we can take it from here.
Okay, well, I'll try. I'm sort of new to this format, so so I'm going to be awkward. So please make allowances for that. So first of all, it's a pleasure. I remember somebody at the end of your last meeting said something about how the group, this group experience is affirmative. And I think it was Michelle actually, and many others chimed in immediately, and me too, listening to it, chimed in as well, because it is. Because you are a kind of a success story in terms of bringing several members with differences in terms of your individual outlooks on things, your individual histories, who you are, your personalities, and managing to create a holding environment where you can all, and I guess armed with the psychoanalytic principles for that, where you can hear each other and process what you hear and respond to it and question, so that you can, in fact, advance a dialogue, which is what you're trying to do. This is the I guess the project that you're all engaged in. So so it's a pleasure to participate in that. I sort of it it evoked a feeling of wanting to be a part of a group like that. It's a nice group to be in, and to be able to do that with other people. The challenge is for me, well, first of all, because I'm entering a group that's already it's kind of coherent in a certain way, but also because I guess I kind of question and differ maybe from Alice's conviction, Alice's sort of intuition about uh, this interpersonal way of negotiating differences. And I think, if I understand it correctly, the idea, her operative idea is that this is something that could be kind of disseminated in a way through the, I guess, participation of many different people trying to do that and disseminating it, and therefore disseminating it out into the larger world. And I am kind of dubious about doing it in that way, without, if it's done without an understanding, so that if we're to graft it onto the sort of larger group formations outside in the world, how are we to do that without knowing the constitution of those groups out there in the world, the formations, how those formations came about? What are they? Is there a way to think about and to develop some kind of some kind of taxonomy in a way of what they are, if we are to help sort of um, for them to develop the capacity that you are practicing in your group. So my focus is on that. I sort of feel that this is what needs to be done in order to be able to getting to know, getting a handle in a way on how to think about this, so as to then know how to adjust this interpersonal kind of method of negotiating the differences. Uh, so so if I understood from your last meeting, you were sort of, you accomplished your first phase in a way of creating the group where you are doing it yourselves. Now the question is of sort of maybe first testing your group of whether or not, and you were talking about perhaps bringing in, divisive topics, weighty topics, and see whether or not you can handle those. And so, which is interesting. In other words, whether your psychoanalytic container is sufficient to be able to do that. And I imagine that I sort of feel that you probably could, that there is enough flexibility and enough goodwill to be able to do it. But even if you do, and several questions came up in that regard, well, questions of, life and death questions, abortion, war, the questions of, is the potency of the unconscious such that that would interfere too mightily with that? The questions of let me see, the questions of religion, the questions of gender identity, the questions of national identity, you know, who is an American? When does an immigrant become an American? If ever. First generation, second generation, third generation, how many generations do you have to establish in order to be an American, a true American? So these questions are challenging. But then I thought an interesting, sort of more kind of up my alley in a way, item came up, which was the one of tribalism. And that's sort of, that gets closer to where I am, kind of. And because, what are tribes? I mean, tribes are formations that are organized because the group comes together to answer the questions, the weighty questions that you had just considered in their own way. And that's how they formed their tribal identity that is so significant. So, um, so it just so happened, and it didn't just happen, it happened because of my interest, that a very sort of weighty book by historian David Hackett Fisher had been sitting on my night table for, I think, maybe a couple of years, waiting for me to crack it open, and which I did. And that was very illuminating, just along those lines. So, so as an immigrant, with an interest in sort of puzzling out this place, this country, this nation, I always felt that the prevailing mythologies, uh, as in every nation, but the prevailing mythologies existing here covered up particular kind of challenging and important, very, very formative, actually, aspects of sort of America, which is one of them is, the separation from motherlands and the toil of colonizing, of settling in a new land, uh, and insufficient empathy, in a way, insufficient national empathy for that, for that effort and for that hardship. Um, and so that's one thing. The other thing is, the lack and the absence of nativity of this country. This land is not native. This is a colonized land. So it had no history, foundational history of natural nativity. And uh, in addition to which, it had the task of creating a national identity in a tremendously foreshortened kind of way, with a tremendous violent pressure of doing that. Um, so and again, so mythology such as, I don't know, of manifest destiny or something, that kind of, they're covering up those challenges, and which I think kind of continue, well, to my mind, sort of continue to sort of be as kind of fault lines, in a way, that, when everything is good and everything is fine, it holds together. But when there is pressures of whatever kind, it may fall apart. But back to the book, to this book by the historian. So what the book organized for me, it kind of organized my thinking more along the lines of tribalism. The book's name is called Albion's Seed. And Albion is a reference to England. So the book is about the successive waves of English settlements, British settlements, from the I guess, early 17th century through the early 18th century. So there are four consecutive waves of colonization from four different, very different regions of England. So they already had a kind of regional tribes there. And each one of them had their own religious preferences of religious dogma, their modus vivendi, their uh, significant principles, their mores and ethos. They were and they settled in particular regions in America, the four different regions in America. And from there, so bringing those kinds of distinctive qualities of their identity, and bringing them to particular geographic realities of regions in America, where they further developed their distinct cultures, which, according to this historian, persists to this day. And um, and even though, I mean, we all know, sort of the idea of a melting pot, and the fact that, there is such a multitude of all kinds of different ethnicities and nationalities from all different, parts of the world. But interestingly enough, that there is that those four major sort of cultures have such staying power that people who come, the immigrants who come to these different regions, get absorbed into those cultures of those regions. So even though they bring in their own stamp of their own nationalities and traditions and so on, nevertheless, the way they become Americanized is very much stamped by the existence of these. So anyway, this was incredibly illuminating to me, and felt very sort of convincing, because it was describing things that, kind of, and organize my own observations of things. So then the idea that I have, I guess, then is that, if we were, just as an aside, he talks about the different presidents, the election of presidents, and how the presidents were elected depending on, sort of which of the regions, in a way, prevailed more under particular kind of conditions. And only two presidents, one of them was Eisenhower, the other one I don't remember, were in the nature of being ombudsmen, that they had sufficient combination of different aspects of the different cultures that therefore could be acceptable, and therefore chosen to be presidents. So so sort of the idea here is that perhaps then, analysts, in a way, if the project were to be successful, that it becomes a kind of a challenge of becoming an ombudsman psychoanalytically, knowing enough about those different cultures and holding all those different cultures in that space, and therefore then being able to create perhaps, the methodology for how to wage a dialogue there. That's it. That's my spiel.
As you talk, I find myself imagining bringing this alive in a room between two and more people. For example, Americans, as represented by our president or whoever, don't like Russia these days because Putin is a bad guy. You're Russian. Somehow in that really clumsy way
Mhm.
to bring those issues alive. What makes Russians be Russian and do the things that Putin is doing if he's representing Russia, and what makes Trump Americans do what Trump sort of represents and sort of doesn't, and that there's similarities, but there are differences between the American, you know, Uncle Sam, uh, and whatever it means to be Russian. And what are we fighting? What's Putin doing? What's Ukraine got to do with it? What's I don't know. I'm just thinking about taking the historical philosophical model that you talk about and bringing it alive so that people can actively engage with it within themselves. Same thing with Israel, Palestine, and liberal, conservative, religious, atheist. To I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, I guess I'm curious. I've always been curious about you coming in as, what were you, 24?
Yeah.
Coming to America at 24, and then coming into the analytic community not long after that. Like, what was that like? Spoken by someone who never left Manhattan.
Well, I mean, that's it's such a big subject. But but maybe just for the argument of the present moment. Um, First of all, the an immigrant, at least this immigrant, I don't know, comes in with a sense of um, tremendous sort of inferiority and submission. You're coming to a promised land of a sorts. You're coming to a land um, where admittedly your background, your culture doesn't matter and doesn't pertain. You're coming to this culture. This is the culture that you need to adapt to. This is the culture where you need to um, figure out how it works and what its rules are and what its values are. Uh, and I suppose and assumptions are, I mean, so for example, just as an example, Alice, you talk about the difference between sort of your ethos as having Catholic background and coming into an environment that was largely, at least in our institute, kind of was, you know, Jewish and atheist Jewish at that. So I'm Jewish, um, and I came in, but my Jewishness had absolutely nothing to do with the Jewishness of the institution. They were probably second, third generation of immigrants from the beginning of the 20th century, from Imperial Russia and the surround. I came in from Soviet Union. I had nothing to do with the with the circumstances. But they assumed I was Jewish, so I was just like them. Well, I wasn't. Nothing like it. Absolutely nothing. And it was infuriating, actually. And that was probably, come to think of it, maybe that was the basis for how, sort of my rebellion in a way, uh, having those kinds of roots as compared to your rebellion that which you processed in your scandalous
Right. Yeah.
um, interaction with Shelley Orgel,
Yeah.
I did it very differently and in a different way. But uh, but ultimately, this land is fascinating. This country, this nation is fascinating because it came about with such an amazing, interesting way and process. And I just feel that it needs more care, more empathy. I think more empathy for it. I think there is a lack of empathy for what it is in all its different manifestations. And if you cannot manage a more understanding and more um, insight and therefore and more empathy based on that, then you're kind of just left to your own tribal allegiances. So basically that's what it is. And my entering psychoanalysis, I think I entered psychoanalysis because I thought it was going to give me a way to a special way too. Not just any way, but a special way of figuring out how to live in this world and how to be in this world. It didn't do that for me. And actually it worked against it. But nevertheless, in the meantime, I think it kind of gifted me with uh, a lot of things that had to do with psychoanalysis.
Mentioned the word motherland, that we're lacking a sense of motherland.
Hmm.
We left the motherland and this country is not our motherland. I mean, I hate the term fatherland actually, because it has associations to me of other times and places. Uh, but I really was struck by that word, motherland, because I think of a place like that's been occupied for a long, long time by the same groups of people. There's a sense of belovedness and care for that land that supersedes some of the things that might be conflictual
Hmm.
that maybe the US doesn't have as much. Plus, we have all these different states. And as you say, each state, well, has its own personality, kind of its own way of being. Particularly, each southern state is very different from another southern state. And I'm in Tennessee. Um, and I want to love Tennessee fully, wholly. I've been born and raised here. I have family from the western part of the state. I was born in the eastern part. I now live in the middle part. I'm very attached to Tennessee, but I still see Tennessee as kind of tough and hard and manly. It ain't a motherland.
Hmm. Hmm.
I wish it were more of one. I
Hmm.
find some motherland aspects of it in the woods and the hills and the rivers and so on, but I wish I could see it more in that way. Maybe I'm riffing off of something you weren't intending to, you know, to set off in me, but that's how I responded to that word motherland.
Hmm. Well, actually, speaking again in terms of those four cultures that I was talking about, I think Tennessee, from my approximate geographical knowledge, probably would belong in his category of backcountry. And that is, so he divided the different regions of that colonization into um, different ways of uh, experiencing and promoting liberty. All of them did liberty, which is interesting because, the formation of the country was that was the process, liberation. They were liberating themselves from the motherland. you know, as we all have to do somehow or other as well. It's just a matter of how to do it, and and what happens in the process. Um, and so he had so the four sort of vectors of liberty. The New England was ordered liberty. The Delaware Valley and extension of it to the west was reciprocal liberty. The plantation land of the Chesapeake Bay influence, and then also stretching into the west, was how do you pronounce it? Hegemonal liberty, based on hegemony. And the backcountry was natural liberty. Okay, running wild, basically. That's what it is. That's why it terrified me when I watched the movie Deliverance. I would never, never want to want to be in that part of the country. And or when there was a meeting, a national meeting, APSA meeting for Austin, and they had just announced something about the gun carry laws, and I was terrified of thinking of going there because of the permissive gun laws. So, uh, you know, I think that's that it the mother of your part of the country is a wild one, and I suppose, I don't know, but I don't even know. I mean, and probably the women's rights are probably more problematic in that part of the country. I don't know whether they still are or not, but maybe. But speaking of motherland, in Russian, Russia is a motherland. There is Matushka, Matushka Россия. This is a name for Russia, is Matushka Россия. Means it's a mother Russia. So I hope I didn't throw a wrench into your group.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Mhm. I didn't want to disrupt you, but
It makes me think that we come from our motherlands as much as we do from our biological mothers.
Exactly.
And somehow we need a theory and a technique, just a way of looking that allows for that difference to, enter our consciousness when we talk to one another, engage with one another, try to understand one another, or fight with one another. How dare you think that? Um, if you grew up in this way at that time, in that setting, in that country, in that culture, yeah, you're going to think that. And we shoot each other down for thinking things that we're entitled to think, not just because we have psychopathology, but because we come from a place that allowed that to shape our identity.
Country song that I love, What Do You Do with Good Old Boys Like Me? It came out, I don't know, some years ago, 20, 30 years ago, maybe. But I look around at the boys of Tennessee, and I see many of them still trying to cling to these old traditions. I want to wear a plaid shirt and hunt and drive my pickup truck and so on. And yet I don't quite belong in some aspects of Tennessee now, particularly the urban areas, as maybe they feel they belong more in the rural areas, but then that sort of sets them against the urban areas. And I want to be able to honor where they've come from, their divans, their deja la. I want to honor that. I want to appreciate that because I know that's significant and deeply held. And I want to do that without having to deny my own self.
That's challenging.
Yeah.
Because I know part of what they think is my father. I grew up with a father who jokingly, but not so jokingly, said to his male friends, yeah, I want to keep Ruby, that was his wife, I want to keep Ruby barefoot and pregnant. That was a common thing for him to say as a joke. So, of course, that was going to be the hill I was going to die on. So to go back and meet those guys, I mean, I'm surrounded by them. I don't have to go back to meet them. They're all around me, and to try to be genuine and open and honest, it can be hard. Like you say, it's difficult. At the same time, I tell you what, I admire some of the stuff about them. So how do we deal with that history? And I'm sure if you add immigration as another layer on that, boy, it gets complicated.
Seems to me that maybe there are three themes that we're sort of grappling with, and one of them is tribalism. One of them is home, like what's home? And sort of tribalism implies a kind of separation, and home implies something that everybody kind of seeks. And I also wonder if there's a gender piece in this. Are some of the difficult conversations connected to the difficulty in the way genders communicate? I mean, I'm aware I'm the only man left standing at the moment. So I'm just thinking about symbolically, what this conversation might be about, and how the way in which women communicate and men communicate, and in the presence of the other, how do we find our voice? How do we find our own tribal connections to our gender, for example? And what crossing the gender roles might mean about betraying our tribal connections. What do we give up if we have these difficult conversations across boundaries? Are we welcome back home then?
One thing that I think psychoanalysis can offer is just awareness of this complexity. Because these days we tend to think superficially, black, brown, native, Asian, Russian, what, and we um, shoot people down by being, you're racist, you're sexist, you're anti-Semitic, and we color people in this very general way and shoot them down for being representative of something, when actually each of those people come by who they are very honestly, whether it's their politics, their religion, their culture, their level of education, their what state or country they're from. I think somehow I always get furious when I hear people throw around ism words and phobia words, because it dismisses something rather than, what are you afraid of? If I think you're phobic of me, talk to me. you know. I'm not going to shoot you down and delete you from my friends list and magically thinking make you go away. It seems to me what we're talking about is tremendous complexity, but it's the kind of thing that somehow we need to pass on to the masses. That they're right to be concerned about these differences, but you can't make them go away by forcing people to change or telling them they shouldn't have no right to exist because they're so pathetic and stupid. Yeah. And that's all I hear these days.
Well,
Go on.
yeah. Oh, thanks, Michelle. To echo Jack, I was sort of trying to think of, what are the themes that are emerging today that Luba is bringing in and that, are sort of in the air. And, Luba, I'm from the former Soviet Union too. Although we arrived here in 1990, I came as a child with my family. So, I also have the experience of coming from Mother Russia, if you will, although we were living in one of the republics of the USSR, not Russia itself, but
Which one?
Latvia.
I was from Lithuania.
Okay, yeah, yeah, ethnically Russian, but well, actually, my mother's side of the family is originally from Ukraine, and anyway, it's complicated. There's Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Estonia, Latvia. So all of the different republics, but I was 11, nearly 12, so kind of old enough to know what was going on and kind of deal with school and assimilation and learning a new language. And to this day, my English is much better than my siblings who are younger. They've sort of held on to Mother Russia much more, if you will. It's quite interesting, but it's sort of, yeah, picking up on what you're saying and the theme of tribalism from before, or from our previous conversations. And I think the position I've come to is that humans are inherently tribal. And, the history of humanity is, evolving in small groups, right? Dunbar's number around 150 is really the number of people that you can expect to know or have a relationship with. And those early, human tribes, the Neolithic, Paleolithic period, most of what glued the tribe together is that they were all related to each other. They were related to each other biologically, right? This isn't genetically. This isn't just an arbitrary, you can't just stick an arbitrary group of people together and expect them to be a cohesive tribe. what glued them together was genetics, right? And then as kind of, humanity progressed, if we want to call it that, or you enter the axial age, and I'm not a historian, but what I'm aware of is that that's when the major world religions developed, is during the axial age. And as people began to live in larger groups, there needed to be something else to glue them together, to tie them together, because at a certain point, it's bigger than Dunbar's number. And at a certain point, you're not genetically related to a lot of the people around you or the people that you might encounter, say, during trading, right? So, you have the development of religions, and you could say we believe the same, we worship the same God, we have the same morality. I can shake your hand and know that that there's going to be trust here, right? Because the shared morality, the shared theology, spirituality, that's what's going to bind us together. And I think the nation state is a similar idea, to say we're all British, we're all Russian, now American, right? Which America, I think, is kind of a different, it's a more complicated, project, as you're alluding to, right? But at a certain point, at a certain level, I think people could say, I'm part of this nation, and that's what binds us together. And even though I'm not genetically related to my neighbor, we can both fly, say, the American flag, we can celebrate the 4th of July, and that's what binds us together. I think the rise of tribalism we're seeing is reflective of the disintegration, maybe, of that kind of fiction. It's a little bit like a legal fiction, right? Like a nation state is kind of a legal fiction. And I think it's reflective that of this disintegration, because people no longer have faith. They no longer really believe. So as the larger structures disintegrate, well, what do people have left? They have left the tribalism at the more base level. Kind of what Lynn was saying about, say, the good old country boys, right? That, the truck or whatnot. I think, and you were talking about the different southern states, maybe Luba, Lynn, I can't remember. But, Texas, I'm in Texas, I'm in Austin, you referenced Austin. Texas is not the South. Texas is its own thing. It's Republic of Texas. It's Texas. Don't mess with Texas, right? And there is a certain culture. And I think actually Texas is probably one of the healthiest states, because there is still a pride that is permitted in this area, in this state, in a way that it seems to not be permitted in other areas because of the white guilt, the colonizers' guilt, the what have you. I think Austin is a little bit different, is quite a bit different from the rest of Texas. But, when you're in more rural parts of Texas, yeah, the guns, right? That, you're on your own property, you can just shoot off guns, and there's a real, nobody's really a cowboy anymore. But I think that spirit lives on, and that there is a certain tribalism and pride that is allowed. So, I don't know kind of what more to say about that. I think those were just the thoughts that were coming up for me. And maybe when we think about, we're all rather different from the average person, right? We're, first of all, whether we were born into those circumstances or kind of got into those circumstances, like I did. A lot of my family is kind of peasant background, right? But we all, I think we can say, we're part of the PMC, the professional middle class, or maybe even professional upper class, right? So I think we're in a different class. We're sort of engaging in these intellectual questions and topics that the average person does not. And maybe I've said something like this before, but I've sort of come back to that. I think the average person should be allowed to live where they are, have ties to the land, have pride in where they are. I'm sorry, but none of this colonizer's guilt. That's not appropriate, I don't think, for the average, family raising their children. It's actually destructive to to the average person, to the average human. Maybe those questions can be engaged with, or those topics at, in academia, right? Or kind of what we're doing here. But I think the average person would be well served by being able to be tied to the place, the land, the town, the traditions that they're in, be able to raise their family in safety and peace, and not be made to feel guilty for a degree of tribalism, which is normal and natural to humans.
You just maybe when you said be made guilty, I'm reminded by an adage: you can't make somebody guilty. You either feel guilty or you don't. You can't do that. So,
Well, but look, come on. You came from communist Russia. You know how well propaganda works.
well, propaganda is propaganda, but I'm just talking about guilt.
Well, but guilt can be propaganda, People can be propagandized into just about anything. I mean, we've seen that play out.
And
I think the average person needs to be protected from harmful ideas. That's how I would sum it up.
hmm. Okay. I think maybe we're in a different tribe now.
Okay, I can accept that.
Because in my tribe, you process those ideas and come up with your own guilt.
Well, yeah, that's the PhD
With
tribe,
your
right?
own
The
guilt.
academia tribe. That's not the sort of the normie, the normal person.
Yeah, but okay, so then what? So then how do you apply sort of the ethos of this tribe, of the psychoanalytic tribe, which is what I think Alice and all of you are trying to do. How do you apply it you know, to the barbarians at the gate?
Okay, who are the barbarians at the gate?
Oh, I
The
mean, all of them.
I'm very
We're
curious.
talking about all of them, because they are not in the psychoanalytic tribe. So they're all barbarians. If they have to be if they have to be protected from difficult ideas, then that's what I mean. I'm
Well,
just
I would not characterize them as barbarians at all.
no,
Yeah,
forget that.
yeah,
I was just
yeah,
being
yeah.
playful. Yeah. No, I don't mean I don't mean that in a ascribing that to them. I'm just simply saying that they're not Romans. Like the patrician class of psychoanalytic cohort.
Right. So I think the patrician class, which used to be the aristocracy, we've lost sort of the classic meaning of the aristocracy, and now anybody with $5 billion or something is considered an aristocrat. It's the merchant class, right? But I think the patrician class, the aristocracy, has a responsibility to protect and take care of the peasant class, if you will.
I don't know. I think and that's where we differ. I think that our responsibility is to enlighten them.
Mm. I disagree.
And I don't mean by imposing it. I don't mean by imposing it. I mean by finding a way of how to apply it so that it could be metabolized by them. I don't mean imposing.
Right. So I just want to say one because I don't want to, take up, want to let others speak, but I will just say this, that any attempts to enlighten have resulted in disaster. Right, the disaster of communism. Now the disaster of something like gender identity, where middle school kids are confused about which gender they are.
Yeah, but well, that's not true enlightenment. That's imposition. That's imposition of a worldview. That's not an enlightenment.
But I think the original intention was enlightenment.
No
I'm just
matter.
saying that it goes wrong, right? That it inevitably goes
But
wrong.
because it isn't true enlightenment.
Right.
When I think of enlightenment,
I have
think of
felt
it-
in the
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I felt in this over this period of time that it was imposition. I was imposed, I was forced to, I remember, when we had those reading groups, right after George Floyd in my institute, everybody was reading. I'm like the only person who's read Black conservatives, and they're so fascinating. I mean, a lot of them are there's tribalism within tribes. But I find that over time sitting with this, I'm so much I mean, we're living through horrible times, but I don't feel so attacked by people who personally. And I think that has to do with kind of living with it, sitting with it, tolerating it. And we need space and time. And I think the fact that people were doing these things, like immediately we have to sign on to this, but that is not true enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think of enlightenment, I think of an analytic insight, a light bulb, where
Mhm.
we realize something from within ourselves that I learned something from experiencing other people's perspectives and suggestions and the way they live their life, and suddenly there's a eureka. I had this wrong. But when people insist and they lead with criticism, you don't care about us, or something that makes you feel guilty, and and then you wind up with guilt that you don't really feel but you think you should feel, and it gets very confusing. I'd love to share enlightenment in the sense of just painting a picture that's intriguing enough for other people to say, maybe they're onto something. You know, maybe there's something here that I want to reach for. And that to me is enlightenment. But it's hard to know where, because if you see something that you think other people need to see, you do have to come on strong. You have to be aggressive, you have to be sexy, you have to be, um, find some way of getting inside the other person. Because it doesn't happen. It doesn't just happen. There has to be some struggle, some process. I don't know.
I sort of following on to that, Alice, I think it's important to speak to the fact that so much of what people think now is being influenced by algorithms and machines.
Yeah.
And that to have a real conversation and a dialogue, you don't really even know if you're talking to another human. And the decisions are being made about how people's attention is captured. And it's really interesting because sort of in the days of social media, the economic incentive was to getting people's attention. But now with AI and the kinds of bots, the connection is of getting people's attachment. And that's pretty frightening. So in terms of all the things that we're talking about, the capacity to have these conversations that aren't influenced by this economic incentive and the being flooded with information is really difficult, and it feels particularly dangerous right now. We're at a point where we're about to lose the capacity to understand who and what we're talking about because the incentives are very much commercial at this point. And that
Very true.
tribalism is reinforced by technology. That's
Yeah. The Oxford word of the year is rage bait.
right. Right.
Meaning what?
From how I understand it, it's baiting people to get enraged so that you have these crazy intense conversations or lack of conversations, that it's a social media thing where you say something and I get infuriated and we date each other.
Well, they've determined that the most financially rewarding headlines on social media are things that will anger people.
Yeah.
Very easy to do that.
It's basically a neurochemical experiment that we're all participating in.
Right.
And the thing that gets the least comment or feedback is the sad emoji. If I comment on something with a sad emoji, it gets less attention than if I commented with a more intense emoji like rage. So that's very interesting that sadness doesn't work.
No, people can't tolerate it.
No.
Well,
I don't
complexity doesn't work either.
No.
know. We live in a very addictive society. And that's the opposite of what we're trying to that's the opposite of understanding. And there was this Oprah special on parental alienation last week. And there's been a lot of chatter about that. And to me, that's an addictive type of way of being because people can't handle. I'm not talking about severe cases, but there's a trend now where it's become contagious, where adult children are cutting their parents off. Not for, and a lot of therapists have a bad influence on this too, and social media. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really destroying society.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the title of this if this YouTube was "Stop Apologizing for Colonialism," a lot of people would be watching our conversation.
Yeah. That's right.
How about if the topic of this of this podcast was, where are you from?
Yeah.
Mhm.
What if that was the title of our podcast?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because I think sort of people want to be known underneath.
Actually, we should do that because I think Matt's just been calling it Analyst Conversation Series, which doesn't say anything. Let's think of a title and give it to him.
Or where are you coming from? Because I think part of this conversation is we see what people say, and without having the conversation of why are you thinking this, each of us has our own story that shows up where we land. So it's a physical thing, it's a psychological thing, it's a family thing, it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, I like that.
I come back to this. In fact, I told some people we're not on the chat yet this afternoon when I said this, but I'm at a workshop for the weekend at a farm. And so I told a group of the people that I'm with this weekend that I was going to be joining this conversation. And I said that one of the things I love about Alice is that she made me very conscious of the phrase psychic reality, that when we talk to each other, when someone shares with us, we have the opportunity to see their psychic reality inside. It's like, hey, a window in here. And this is an amazing, it's to me an amazing blessing and opportunity. And they were kind of asking about that, like, well, what does that mean? How do you amplify that and so on? But I do think that, like when Katrina just now shared some of her thoughts about leaving some people alone and not trying to enlighten them. I mean, I felt like, Katrina, you were sharing some psychic reality about yourself that maybe I had picked up on it a little bit, but I picked up on it more, with what you said. And I was grateful to see that or to hear that.
Mhm.
Well, Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I suppose that's true. I mean, I was sort of waxing a little bit about, kind of our class and academia, and we're sort of engaging with these questions, and I do have this tendency to go down the rabbit hole to, to get at things, to get at the logical conclusion of something. But, I've got two brothers who are both electricians. They both have a large number of children with their wives. They both have large families, and they just live simple, working class lives, if you will. And there are times I think they're wiser than I am, that they've sort of gotten at something that's important about life without this kind of tortured rabbit holing. That's maybe my best way to sum it up.
Hmm.
Oh, and they're both very devout, very religious also.
If we could just get people to lead with curiosity rather than criticism,
Mhm.
it would go a very long way.
Well, I'm actually curious on how you became devout coming from the Soviet Union. Is that too personal? Is
You asking Katrina or are you asking Luba?
Trina? Yeah.
Oh, me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Sorry, Michelle. Well, so when we were living in Latvia, I actually grew up Baptist. I remember us going to a red brick Baptist church in Riga, in the center of Riga. And in retrospect, I was a child, didn't know much about it, but in retrospect, it was most certainly one of the KGB infiltrated churches that were, it's sort of allowed to operate and to have meetings, probably because there was oversight, right? Only later I found out that there were such things as underground churches in Russia, because people were persecuted. So then we came to the States, and there was a small, well, not that small, actually. Uh, there was a Baptist church in an affluent area in a small town in Washington State that took us in, kind of this very large, very poor Russian family. And they sort of, embraced us and took us in, and like somebody sold us a car for $1. And, we got all kinds of household goods, and people were very, very kind, very generous. I would say that's sort of the best of the American tradition, right? Like a real generosity. And I think it didn't hurt that it was an affluent area, so people had money to give. So then as a teenager, I sort of had my own qualms and criticisms, of the Baptist faith. And I left, I left Christianity, and I was not Christian or religious at all for many, I would say, decades of my adult life. And then, a number of you have referenced psychoanalysis being a Jewish atheist profession, and indeed it is. And, God works in mysterious ways because it was the result of analysis of many years with a Jewish atheist analyst. And I do know that to be the case about this person, that I became Catholic. My son
Fascinating.
and I became Catholic at the same time. We were received into the Catholic Church on Easter Sunday, on the same day.
And the same day as,
Well, my son and I on the same day.
your
We
son.
both became, yeah, because we hadn't baptized him, but I became, and so I'm not actually also growing up Baptist. I was never baptized, but in middle age, I was baptized into the Catholic Church, and then my son, as a teenager, was baptized on the same day too. So that's what I meant. But both of us on the same day.
When you first shared this initially, Katrina, I know you spoke about how this created some splits with your family around that choice. Am I remembering that correctly with the rest of your family?
Well, Jack, I mean, not necessarily, but they are all Protestant. That is true, and there is some suspicion of Catholicism. I have noticed this, and actually since that happened, I've noticed it more and more that there's this kind of animosity between Protestants and Catholics. And I, my siblings, yeah, they're the devout brothers I reference. They are very, I would say, evangelical, and I'm not sure why. It's sort of something I'm kind of turning over and trying to understand more about. But there's a real animosity coming from evangelicals towards Catholics, and not necessarily the other way around. I don't think.
I mean, it's interesting because it's sort of like there are the tribes we're born into, and then there are tribes we choose to
Yeah.
join
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
have implications of tribes we're leaving, you know.
yeah.
It's
And
another
the Jews are kind of the lost tribe, so we're always wandering around trying to figure out where we belong.
I love that.
exactly. That's how I feel.
I've always left my tribes, but held on to it.
Mm.
Like I was raised very Catholic. And when I entered the Jewish atheist Freudian world, I embraced that too, but constantly struggled to integrate them in myself. I could never just to let go of something that was, it felt like it was part of my DNA.
Mm.
And I'm glad to reach this point in my life when I actually can hold both in my psychic reality at the same time. And I love playing with Jesus as the first analyst who triggered a transference neurosis and got idealized and killed, a transference resistance, and got himself idealized and killed because nobody wanted to hear what he had to say. But my point is that I have always worked very hard to find creative umbrella that would allow me to hold my religiousness, my atheism, my scientist bent, my philosophical bent, my femininity, and whatever the kids would call me today. I don't know what category they'd put me in. I don't know, but the idea of tribalism is going to stick with me for a while. There's also our tribe, because I feel like Luba is a worthy immigrant. I would like to invite her, to be part of this. But then I think, what if, either people drop out or more people want to come in? What are the boundaries? And how does one get a green card to?
This.
I love that analogy, Alice.
Now, Luba, if you join our tribe, you have to get a tattoo.
Hmm. Is
Ooh.
that so? Is that so? Or do I have to be pregnant and barefoot?
It's just like the idea of bringing these external issues alive in our midst, and having to deal with them from within our own community.
Well, personally, I feel like I'm very open to whoever wants to come into the group. I think it's always interesting to have various perspectives and even to kind of spar back and forth, like Luba was saying, we're in different tribes now. I think it makes life interesting. I think it's
I
more,
absolutely agree.
yeah.
I love the tribe of true diversity, of really being open to, because it's richer to be exposed to different things. And I became religious later in life,
Mm.
and that to me was a kind of immigration from one culture to a very, very different culture. And not really feeling, as Luba had said, good enough for that world that I'm not really part of, but that I identify with.
So the other night, I had this great fun of meeting this couple who came to, we run these nonviolent training sessions, and this couple came. She's an artist, he's an academic, actually he's from Germany, so he's an immigrant here, and he's a art critic, music critic, historian, philosopher. I mean, this is what he teaches at Vanderbilt, all of those, and he's the head of a particular institute within Vanderbilt. So he was so interesting, and she was too, that when I went home after the meeting, I Googled him, and it turns out he had written one, I mean, his bibliography is huge, but he had written an article about, you know, when you're a philosopher, sometimes you write about thinking, enlightenment, thinking. Well, the other thing you can be in a philosopher mode is you can write about the senses. You know, that's another philosophical topic, you know. You can be an idealist or you can be a materialist, and materialists often start with the senses. So he had written a whole lot about sound. And he had written one article that, I mean, he had written a whole lot in German, so that was all lost to me because I don't speak any language but English. But he had written this one article about sound, and the word he used about sound in writing this article was resonance. And I just could not get that resonance out of my mind. I thought, wow, what a word that is.
Wonderful word.
Yeah. I don't know why I said that just now, but it kind of came up.
You know what, Lynn? I think you have to get to resonance. We have to get to lots of dissonance and tolerate a lot of dissonance. And that's an analytic process to get to resonance.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Michelle, I love that. I think that's such a beautiful way to put it, that we have to tolerate a lot of dissonance to get to resonance. I think that's true. I think that's been true of my trajectory, my experience. And it also reminds me, one of my favorite kind of contemporary writers, his name is Paul Kingsnorth, and he's written about his own conversion to becoming Orthodox. He was actually practicing Wicca at the time, and he described this experience like the Holy Spirit pulled him out of that and into Orthodoxy, into Christianity, essentially, right? But he sort of had to go through that experience of the dissonance, right? Of the dissonance of what he was doing to get to the resonance of the one true faith.
Well, I would take it even further, that even resonance isn't total resonance. Resonance has dissonance in it also.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, achieving orgasm that's one thing, but real life is a lot of dissonance. And how much balance of dissonance and resonance can one hold?
Like, meaning that life is full of dissonance that we're always having to work through, right? Is that what you're saying, or that is just sort of there in the background?
I think it's both.
Hmm.
I mean, I connect it to a healthy amount of conflict is necessary to engage.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Wonderful. And I think people are afraid of that healthy amount of conflict, so we don't engage.
Dr. King says conflict is inevitable.
Yeah.
Speaking of sound, Lynn, your microphone is kind of soft. I don't know if you have it set in Zoom or not, but
Oh, maybe I could go up here.
we can hear you, but you're just a little bit soft.
Okay. Is that better or not?
I think that's better.
Okay.
Mhm.
So could we also be talking about how we regulate ourselves amid conflict?
Well, I think the group tends to regulate itself too. I mean, I'm sort of aware of Luba coming in and there's like new energy in the group, we're missing one person from the group. So the size of the group and how much conflict we can contain, or do we use someone? I mean, I feel like Katrina, you take a lot of risks in terms of opening up things, so I think we load we put you in that role as if you're the only one who thinks outside the box in this group. So again, I think there's a unconscious process that we're all engaged in to kind of keep the container there. And we're just sort of exploring now, like how much we can extend it and open it and what's safe and what's not safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Uh, I miss Cameron's presence
Yeah.
because although I don't want to stereotype him, I do think, okay, he's a fellow Southerner, so that's kind of a companion to me in that regard.
Mhm.
His presence is.
Yeah, there's a kind of group phenomenon going on, but there's also a kind of pairing phenomenon also present in the group.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm,
Almost from the very beginning.
mhm,
So is that tribalism?
mhm.
Even though we might be from different tribes, but there are alliances.
Or maybe that's the analytic pair. Maybe there's something significant about that initial pair that's built in kind of in some ways.
Well, I think we're wired for that kind of mirroring, right? That we're sort of we're looking for the mirroring, the affirmation, and it makes sense that there would be kind of some pairing up on that basis. And but I think also being analyst or being interested in psychoanalysis, I think just by virtue of that we do have some, probably a higher than normal tolerance for conflict and the negative capability, right? So I think that's where I appreciate you saying that Jack, opening things up. Yeah, I think I kind of find it boring when it's just agreement or I mean I like engaging with ideas. I like it to be lively. I appreciate that, Luba coming in is making it lively too. Maybe to riff off your what you were saying earlier, Jack, about we could title this "Stop Apologizing for Colonialism," or "You don't have to apologize for something like that," right? And we could add "and opening up the Overton window" or expanding the Overton window.
What window?
So Overton window, I think it was a political theorist. I think his name was William Overton, if I remember right. But the idea is what is the acceptable range of discourse in society at any given time? And so it's kind of a shorthand to say expanding or narrowing the Overton window, right? As you're expanding, more things can be talked about. Maybe this is also connects to Michelle's point about Black conservatives, right? That they've successfully expanded the Overton window in terms of what can be talked about.
And how hard it was, hard it is to expand that window.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Is there a way we can go from here to expand that window into some more charged area, perhaps? Or
Well, I'm afraid of it. I can admit that I'm afraid.
yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, Israel-Palestine is very, very difficult. And, even if I hear it being said, I feel it viscerally in my body.
Does that mean we should go there? Or should we just keep, I'm thinking of next time. Should we just see where this goes and
I think it took a lot of courage for me to actually be able to say publicly that I'm afraid.
Mm.
yeah.
I mean, maybe each of us has the one topic that we were most afraid of.
That would be an interesting discussion.
Yes.
And we have to talk, because if we don't talk, look where we are.
Yeah.
So yes, even though I am afraid, I'm not saying that this should be our topic the next time, but the idea of maybe using an analytic process and making it as safe as possible to ease into discussion about, each of us have these difficult areas that are hard to talk about.
My friend
For
Summer Ali,
instance,
Summer Ali, who founded Millions of Conversations, says that the point is to be able to have brave conversations. Not safe conversations, but brave conversations. But to be able to do it, and what's required to be able to do that. And what she focuses on is that we have more in common than what divides us. That's the big point of Millions of Conversations. So I think for me, for example, with you, Michelle, to talk about Israel-Palestine, I would have to really appreciate what you and I have in common that would allow us to talk about something that could be fraught.
It could be fought or fraught.
Fraught.
Oh, she said fraught.
Fraught. But the fact is that over these conversations that we've had, I find myself really feeling the commonality with Michelle and also with Katrina. I really feel that. Maybe I didn't feel that so much at first, but
I feel the same way.
Yeah, I do too.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can go to a deeper place. I'm not sure. Maybe we can think together about where to begin and if there's a specific topic that we would want to start with, or even just talking about what topics we're most scared of. But I guess we can email about that and figure out the next date. Luby, you're comfortable joining us?
I'm comfortable. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I fit in.
What makes you say that?
Maybe because I'm not sure actually. Maybe because you have formed attachments with each other.
You're the immigrant.
Right. It's an important dynamic for us to explore. What is that experience of you with sort of beginner's mind coming in from the outside? And if you're willing to be that immigrant for some period of time, we can watch the whole process of joining a culture and socialization and what you give up to join, or all those complicated things.
Well, that's a good basis for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, we should be aware of transferences that we come to represent, each of us separately and our audience, that I'm sure if anyone watches this, I think there were 150 views on the last one. that, what other people will think.
Yeah, of course, it's your choice, Luba, but I sincerely feel that there's room for you here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I agree.
You're stuck, whether you wanted to or not.
Well, as an adventure, as a venture and adventure.
Sounds good.
As a venture, I like that. I like that word venture.
All right, be continued.
Sounds good.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes.
Happy holidays to all.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Bye.
Right.